Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Holly Ainley, Head of Programmes and Creative Engagement at the National Centre for Writing, here at Dragon Hall in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature. Here at Dragon Hall, we are busy getting ready for our exclusive crime writing masterclass this week with CWA Dagger-winning writer Ellie Griffiths. This masterclass forms part of the NCW Academy, our brand new home for creative writers. And you can discover all our upcoming workshops over at nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk/workshops. In this episode of The Writing Life, NCW's former CEO Chris spoke to a best-selling crime writer who many of us know and admire. He is Ian Rankin, talking about his new standalone short thriller, The Rise. Ian Rankin was born in the Kingdom of Fife in 1960 and graduated from the University of Edinburgh in 1982. He is the internationally best-selling author of the Inspector Rebus and Detective Malcolm Fox novels, as well as a string of standalone thrillers. His books have been translated into 36 languages and are bestsellers on several continents. Today, you'll hear Ian and Chris discuss Ian's much-loved series character, Inspector Rebus, and his return to the page in a new phase of life in Ian's Amazon original story, The Rise. Ian shares the challenges he found in writing a short story and considers the way writers always find a way to tell the stories they need to tell. He chats with Chris about his thoughts on the upcoming TV adaptation of Rebus and the differences between novel writing and screenwriting. So now, without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Chris in conversation with Ian Rankin.
Welcome, Ian Rankin, to The Writing Life. How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm just back from holiday, rested, tanned, about a stone overweight. Everything you would expect from a good holiday.
Do you still get that sort of September-ish back-to-school college feeling that we all get, or is that gone now?
My year tends to be revolve around the writing of books or the promoting of books. So September is kind of meaningless to me. Mm-hmm. It's usually the time when I'm just starting to get a little bit twitchy because I need to start writing a book or a project soon, but nothing is quite happening yet.
So you kind of got that anticipatory feel about the whole thing.
Yeah, and that never goes away, that fear and the adrenaline, that never goes away. It doesn't matter how many books you've written. It is as though you're writing your very first book for an audience that doesn't know you at all.
I'm not sure if our listeners will be comforted or appalled by that prospect of it never changing.
I was appalled. I mean, I thought once you'd written 5 or 10 books, it would be like stripping a car engine. You could just do it blindfold. But it ain't like that. Every book is a new set of fears.
Yeah, I've got a very vivid memory of talking to Naomi Alderman, who was, I think, just starting to write her 4th novel at the time, and she just looked at me and said, "Oh, I just sat there for 2 days thinking, I've got no idea how I did this the last 3 times."
Well, I think what helps me is that I don't do a lot of planning before I start, so it is a leap into the void, but I know from past experience that everything will be all right in the end. So, in fact, more crime writers than you might imagine, Chris, they don't know what they're going to do when they start. They don't know who the killer is. They don't know why the person was murdered, if it is a murder. They really don't know much about what's going on, and they just fly by the seat of their pants. And the story, the book, the narrative eventually tells them where to go, which is fun.
What's the kind of shape of that fear that you have in this sort of place in the year, in this time?
I think almost everybody I know in the creative industries, as we must call them, apparently, has that imposter syndrome. This is the time I'll be found out. This is the book people will hate. This is me falling off a cliff face. Because, when you're younger, you feel that each book is getting better and better and better and better. And you're learning. And as you learn, each book does improve. But there must come a point where that stops. There must come a point where you're not learning anymore and the books are not improving, I would imagine. And then you've got this kind of plateau. I think Ruth Rendell a long time ago talked about this notion that you get a plateau that you're on, and you just hope that the plateau goes on for quite a long time before you start then to go downhill, slowly, gently into that good night.
Yeah, I think that I sometimes wonder if the concept of late work has sort of been invented to kind of describe a very particular sort of post-plateau period for some writers or not. It's a really interesting
and I mean, the other thing is you're aware is you get, in your young days, you're young and hungry and you're snapping at the heels of all these bigger selling writers, better known writers. And then you become one of those bigger selling writers or better known writers. And then you're suddenly aware of these people napping at your heels again. And you think, all right, so they want me to move out the way now so that their generation can come through. I'm just a blockage that's stopping this younger generation from getting up to the plateau that I'm on. So it's a weird one. I started very young, and maybe I even started too young. I had no idea what I was doing. I was in my early 20s when I wrote my first novel. Mm-hmm. I really had no life experience, no idea what I was doing, and why I invented this guy, Rebus, who was older than me and had life experiences that I had never had and never would have. I've got no idea.
There was no sort of kind of, or do you think there was an element of kind of projection there that you wanted to be looking from that angle?
I think there's an element of projection in that he's the bigger, tougher me that I wish I could have been. I was the kind of quiet, bookish, shy, creative kid at school who just locked himself in his bedroom at night and wrote poems to girls he couldn't talk to in the playground that they would never see, poems they would never see, and eventually song lyrics and short stories and what have you. But then there's this kind of action man, Rebus, who gets into all kinds of scrapes and always has a perfect one-liner. And has heft, he has physical heft, and he's sharp, and he gets into dangerous situations, which I would shy away from. So he, in some ways, has been my Mr. Hyde, which allows me to be gentle Dr. Jekyll.
Interesting. Well, I wonder, kind of on that note, we're here in part today to talk about your new story, your new book, which is coming out in very early November with Amazon Original Stories, called The Rise. And that is or do you want to tell us a little bit about the concept of the Amazon Original Stories, kind of the brief that you had, and before we talk about the story itself?
Sure. Well, the brief I got was this will be an ebook and an audiobook, and it's to be consumed hopefully in one sitting. So there were kind of restrictions on length, restrictions on how complicated it could be for the listener or the reader. How many characters you were having to focus on and everything else. And that was it. I mean, I was given a lot of leeway. I was given a lot of freedom. And for me, one of the pleasures of it was that it wouldn't be a slow write. It wasn't that I was having to sit down for the length of time it would take to write a novel, for example. Mm-hmm. It could be done in a few weeks, hopefully, and that turned out to be the case. And it wasn't going to be a rebus. It wasn't necessarily going to be set in Scotland. And I'd had this idea at the back of my mind for a long time about these ghost town areas of London where you get these huge high-rise blocks, steel and glass blocks that go up that nobody seems to live in. If you go past them at night, the windows are darkened because they've been bought by hedge funds or by foreign nationals so they can hide their money away, or as a safe place should something happen in the country of the owner and they have to flee. And London seems like a safe place to them. And it's this kind of invisible. It's part of London, it seems invisible. And it's a side of London that hasn't much been written about in fiction. It has, in fact. There have been plenty of books about the oligarchs and the dark money and everything else that flows through London, but not much in fiction. And the idea that I'd had was, I'd have a night security guard who's got the whole building to himself because nobody lives there. And I saw it as being quite filmic, but I couldn't get anybody interested in a film. So you do what you need to do, and you find other routes for your storytelling. If there's a story that needs to get out, and I just thought this is perfect. It's a perfect length to tell this one high concept tale of it starts with a murder. It starts with a night security guy being murdered in what is essentially an empty, high-tech, high-security building.
Well, it's interesting you say you kind of considered it filmic. I think the first kind of couple, 2 or 3 pages, the image that came to mind was an Edward Hopper picture for me, kind of looking at a lit building from the outside with kind of some sparse life inside and not quite sure what was going on there. The reason I kind of started there, I suppose, thinking about the Rebus Jekyll, and we have D.S. Gillian Gish in this story in The Rise. Can you talk us a little bit about kind of why or how she came to you and kind of what she offers you as a writer now at this point in your storytelling life?
Well, she just jumped into my head. You know, I thought, okay, we've got a murder scene, so there's going to be detectives who will be summoned and who will arrive. And I quite like the idea. It's by no means a novelty that you'd have one would be seasoned, perhaps on the verge of retiring, and one would be younger and have a different skill set. And I thought it'd be nice if one was male and one was female. And I decided the older guy the retiree would be male and the younger cop would be female. And just sort of putting the two of them together. And if, he's a sole parent, but his daughter has grown up and left home. She lives at home with her mum, and her mum has dementia, and carers and neighbours come in and look after her. So you've got, their personal lives developed in front of my eyes as I was starting to write the story. But she just jumped onto the page, as Rebus did in the early days. He just jumped onto the page and came out of nowhere. And sometimes the best characters just come out of nowhere. They announce themselves as the best person to tell the story you want to tell.
I think the one of the functions of the brevity of the form, the shortness of this particular story, is how much as a reader every single sort of brushstroke of that characterization really counts, and it's really beautifully done here. You really get these two characters in their sort of different stages of their lives. What did you feel were the kind of respectively the constraints and the liberations of this kind of brief or shorter form?
The Rebus novels will have a cast of 40, 50, 60 characters. I knew I couldn't do that. If it's going to be read in one or two sittings, you want everybody to keep it all in their head. It has to be containable. So I decided, okay, we've got a high-rise block of billionaires and millionaires, but not many of them can be at home. I can only deal with maybe half a dozen of them being in situ. And I thought, well, that's fine, because most of these apartments will be empty anyway, permanently empty. And so I thought, okay, who have I got? Which characters do I need? Who would be interesting? I thought an oligarch's an interesting character, maybe a tech billionaire's an interesting character. Somebody from a Saudi royal family could be an interesting character. Maybe a famous actor or actress. And I just, so I started to juggle with who would be interesting people for me to spend time with. And Gish, my young detective, she just seemed like a fascinating character to me, because she is, she sees things that the older guy doesn't see. She sees things that the seasoned cop, her ostensible partner, although they're thrown together as would happen in a real investigation. They don't really know each other that well. They know each other vaguely. But she would have skills that he doesn't have. He would have life experience that she hasn't got. They can learn from each other. But which one of them is the leader? There's always going to be a slight jostling. Although he is her senior in rank, when it comes to looking up things on computers or interviewing people, in some ways she will be seen as his superior. She's better than him at doing some of this stuff. And I was wanting to get in a sense of the teamwork that goes on in a police inquiry, but again, keep it quite tight, because I've only got a limited number of words to use. So as you say, it had to be brushstrokes. I had to try and sum up a character in a couple of lines. So there's one cop back at the police station who chews gum. And Milton, the older cop, says, "Why is she always chewing gum?" And Gish says, "Because if she doesn't, she's on 40 a day." And I just think, that's 1-2 lines, but it gives you an idea of the person, the person behind the person. So the other cop is a bit more human and a bit more 3D than might otherwise be the case. Because in crime fiction, it certainly used to be the case that a lot of the characters were only there to furnish the information that the cops needed, the central characters needed, or you felt the reader needed. So the purpose of a Watson in the Sherlock Holmes stories is to say, but how could you have possibly worked it out, Holmes, so that Holmes can tell us, the readers? And that's often been the case with the sidekick of the detective, is just there to say, but how do you know that? Which is the one question that the reader really wants to know. But I thought, well, I can do a little bit more than that. Gish, although she's the junior member, is not going to be saying, "Oh, but how did you work that one out?" Because she's busy solving it by herself, going off and doing her own little investigation. So that was fun. It was fun. And it was because I knew that it wasn't going to be the 6-month haul that a novel can be. I thought I can relax a little bit.
Yeah.
I can actually have some fun. It's going to zoom along. It's going to be set over just 2 or 3 days. In fact, originally it was just going to be set over one night. But I thought it's unrealistic that you wrap up a crime in 12 hours or whatever it is. For the readers, I think it's unrealistic. So then I thought, okay, so we do need scenes at the police station, and we do need the personal lives of the characters. But we're really only in those 2 places. We're either in the police station or we're in the building itself. We're in the rise. So again, you get that slight claustrophobia, which I quite liked, because I was kind of saying, this is a claustrophobic situation. These billionaires are basically imprisoning themselves in cells because the outside world terrifies them.
Well, it also reminded me slightly of the contemporary version of a country house murder.
Yeah. It's a locked room mystery. Yeah. At its heart, it's like a locked room mystery.
Yeah.
This is a high security place. There's CCTV. There are, high security doors and everything to get through. Why was this concierge, this night guard, why was he killed? Who did it? What in the building did they want? Or was it someone who lives in the building? And if so, why? Was it personal? Was it just business? What's going on here? So there's a lot of threads, but not so many that the reader is going to get totally bamboozled. And I think I've played fair. I think if you follow all the clues, you too can solve the crime.
Yeah, I think you've played fair as well, from my point as a reader. I didn't kind of get that sort of hold on a minute moment sometime when you feel the rug being twitched underneath your feet.
It's an unusual project for me, really, Chris, because as I say, when I'm writing a book, I'm normally just make it up as I go.
Yeah.
And even if I'm writing a stage play or whatever, I usually just make it up as I go. And this was more of a kind of high concept thing. I sort of knew before I started it where I wanted it to go and what was going on. So it was of a size and a length that I could contain it in my head. Whereas a novel is just too much. There's too much to keep it in your head, or for me, to keep it all in my head, which is why I'm much happier making it up as I go along, hoping that eventually the book will tell me what's going on.
Well, I wondered what, if anything, you learned about yourself as a writer through facing this particular constraint and doing this high concept kind of brief approach.
Well, I've got very comfortable writing the Rebus books, and I always like to, if I can, get out of my comfort zone. And this took me out of my comfort zone. It's a high concept thriller. It's of a length that I've hardly done this kind of length before. I didn't know whether the length would work when I sat down to start it. I was very reassured when I got to the end of the first draft, and it was pretty much spot on lengthwise. So I had no idea if it was going to be too short, too long, or whatever. It's that stretching yourself. It's try to do something, try to tell a story in a slightly different way, or get into the heads of a different set of characters. It just stops me getting lazy. It stops me getting lazy as a writer. It would be very easy for me to coast writing a Rebus novel, people knowing kind of what they're going to get. It's not going to be a comedy of manners. It's not going to be Jane Austen. It's going to be Rebus again. It's going to be set in Edinburgh. It's not going to be set in Timbuktu or New York. So this, setting it in London, a place I've hardly written about at all in my fiction, was interesting. Setting it in contemporary London, the London of dark money and oligarchs, was interesting. The kind of cast of characters is a much more high caliber, much more high society than the people who would normally inhabit my books. So all of that meant that it gave me challenges, but it's good to be challenged, I think. It's partly the reason why I decided that Rebus would live more or less in real time, because then I couldn't coast, because between books he has aged and his life has moved on and he has changed physically and psychologically. So when I start a new book, it keeps me on my toes. It's like I've got a new character in front of me. It's not, like Miss Marple hardly changes, right, during the course of the books. Hercule Poirot hardly changes during the course of the books. But Rebus, we've watched age more or less in real time, from being late 30s in book 1 to now being 70.
Yeah, well, I'm absolutely going to come back to Rebus, given that I think this Christmas I read the latest one and I have questions.
Which will all be answered next year, young man.
Oh, don't. That's the answer already. So what do you think you've come away with from kind of setting yourself this challenge with the Amazon Original Stories format? What, do you think it might liberate you to do other things, exercising a new muscle somehow?
Well, it's an interesting length. I mean, in some ways, it's an unsellable length if you're trying to do it as a book, because novellas just don't sell, do they? Unless you're doing it as an ebook or you're doing it as an audiobook. And yet they should.
A high-end publisher to publish it in a very short format with big font.
Yeah. Or if you do, what you do is you add a few short stories in there, and you've got a collection. I mean, you see that a lot. It's always surprised me though that short stories are not more in vogue than they should be, because the kind of lives that we lead now, where you've got a shortish commute to work or a shortish commute home from work. People are getting into podcasts. A half-hour podcast is ideal for your commute. Well, so is an audiobook or indeed an ebook. So you can, on the course of a journey to and from work, you can have read this on your phone or your Kindle or whatever. You could have listened to it. You can listen to the audio version. So I think it's a very pleasing length. And it's a lot easier than having to sit down with a 700-page novel. I mean, as great as Demon Copperhead is, it's quite a hefty book to carry around with you all day.
It is, yeah, more of a bedside table than a bedside read, as I think someone once said. And kind of thinking about that bigger task of a novel and the difficulty of holding it all in your head, so kind of feeling less comfortable with kind of dealing with or having to deal with the uncertainty. Is that sort of mitigated to a degree by the fact that you don't just write Rebus novels, of course, you write under other names and you've written other things, but with returning to Rebus, is there sort of a degree of security in that kind of that context that sort of means that you don't have to face some of that uncertainty any longer? You know his world so well.
I don't know. I mean, there are positives and negatives about it. There are lots of challenges that come with writing about the same person. You don't want to be bored by them. You don't want the reader to get bored of them. So you've got to keep making them interesting. The thing about the Rebus books is, when I get an idea for a story, it's only after I've got the kind of general idea for the story that I think, which character is going to be the best character to tell this story? And so far, the answer has almost always been Rebus, but it needn't necessarily be the case. I might get ideas for stories and think, well, it can't be Rebus who tells this one. It's got to be someone else. And that could be Siobhan Clarke, his one-time colleague who's still a serving police officer, or it could be a completely different character. But once I've decided that Rebus is the best person to tell the story, then I've got to get my thinking cap on and think, okay, so how's he doing? How's his health? What's his social situation, his love life? How hard is it going to be for him to inveigle his way into a criminal investigation because he's an OAP? And he's coming up against cops who started the job after he retired. So they don't know who he is. So they're not going to give him any leeway. They're not going to allow him past the crime scene tape. They're not going to let him into a murder scene. He's got to use his wits and his guile to try and get his way past the cordon and get into the murder scene. In an attempt to show the world that he can still make a difference, that he still has a role to play, that he needn't be put out to pasture. And so that's been interesting to me since I retired. I retired him a long time ago. Exit Music was intended to be, and I thought would be, the final Rebus novel. Yeah. Because he was retirement age. He could no longer operate as a cop. And then I went away and I spent 5 years not writing about him. And then got an idea for a book that involved a cold case. And there was a unit in Edinburgh that looked into cold cases, and it was staffed entirely by retired detectives. And I thought, well, do I invent a new retired detective? I've already got one. And Rebus would not go gentle into that good night. He would want to feel useful. If there's any chance of him getting a job, he'll take it. So as a civilian, he joins the cold case unit. And suddenly he's back. And I was terrified that his voice would no longer be there, not having written about him for 5 years. But no, he leapt onto the page. I think that the first book opened, the retirement books, the first one, Standing at Another Man's Grave, opens at a funeral. And Rebus is at a distance. He's at the very back, not at graveside, but further back at the trees. And his first thought is, I'm gasping for a cigarette. Yeah. And I thought, yeah, you're here.
Still there.
You never went away. You never, there's a line in Jekyll and Hyde. Dr. Jekyll says, my demon had been long caged. He came out bounding or something, or he came out leaping. He's unlocked a part of his brain that brings Hyde back into being. And that's just what it was like. It was like Rebus had been kept in a little cell in my head. And when I unlocked it and opened the door, out he came, ready for more shenanigans.
Thinking about kind of Rebus in a different guise, I know that there is a new TV adaptation. Is it 24 or 23 that's due?
It's going to be coming out in 2024. It's an interesting one because I think it's a 6-parter. It's 6 times 1 hour to tell one story. Because I didn't feel best served by television previously, because when they originally did it, it was 2 hours on ITV, which was an hour and 40 minutes plus advertising breaks per book. And then when they brought it back with Ken Stott rather than John Hannah, they took it down to 1 hour on ITV, which was 45 minutes per book. Well, that's a 45-page script from a 400-page novel, so you throw everything out. Everything gets thrown out apart from the title, and you start building up. This, given 6 hours, means that the screenwriter, the scriptwriter, Gregory Burke, who's fantastic, we've got a lot in common, so I trust him completely. He's been able to develop, and the characters have all got room to breathe. It's not just about the plot. It's not just about the red herrings. The characters are given a lot of time to develop, which is fantastic. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I've only seen the first 2 episodes so far. There's only 2 episodes finished. I mean, it's all filmed. It's all in the can. But they're editing it and tweaking it and doing this and doing that. And it's looking great. It looks great. And we've got my almost namesake, Richard Rankin, playing Rebus, which is
spotted that. I was thinking
people think it's
more or less unlikely.
Nepotism writ large, but it's just absolute coincidence. And he's terrific. He's terrific. But one thing that's going to slightly discombobulate long-time Rebus fans is that he's young.
This is what I was going to ask. So where are we in his life journey?
Well, the book is set in the present day. So the book is set, 2023. Sorry, the TV series is set 2023. But Rebus is in his 40s. So we've gone back to the kind of macho Rebus of the early books, when he can be physically intimidating and he can chase suspects down the street and stuff. So we've got that lively, full of vim and vigor Rebus, but set against contemporary times and contemporary politics.
Excellent. And is it a brand new storyline as well?
Again, what's happened is me and Gregory sat down and we bounced stuff around, and he's taken threads and plots and subplots from, I would say, 3 or 4 of the books and weaved them in, and then added in a couple of new things. But as you're watching it, if you're a Rebus fan, you're going, oh yeah, that's from that book, but that's from that book, and but it all gets woven in so beautifully that it makes one very coherent story.
I've got a couple of questions. I'm really interested in this idea of, I don't know if this is a word, but the Netflixification of books, giving you more space, much more time. It just seems like a much richer, more exciting opportunity for fans of book adaptations. But I'll come back to that. But I also read somewhere that you literally discovered them filming the new Rebus series while you were walking through Edinburgh without realising it was there.
Yeah, twice. Happened to me twice. The first time I was walking to the Oxford Bar, and as I was walking along George Street, one of the main streets in central Edinburgh, I could see all these lorries and vans and things. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? And somebody said to me, oh, they're filming. I said, what are they filming? It's called Rebus. I went, all right. So I walked down to the Oxford Bar, and sure enough, they were setting up outside. So I got to meet the director. I can't remember if Richard Rankin was there that day. I certainly got to meet I did meet him. I met the director and I met the actor for the first time, just as I was going into the pub for a pint. They were only doing exterior shots, so it wasn't a problem. Another day I was walking along behind the University Library, Edinburgh University Library, and there was another unit set up, and I thought, oh, here we go again. So I stopped and watched, and there was Richard Rankin walking out of the library, the theatre, the Aikman Theatre, which is next to the University Library. Walking out of it because they've transformed it into a police station. So it was quite fun because, I was at Edinburgh University studying for a PhD when I wrote the first Rebus novel. So it was like things had come full circle.
It sounds like a peculiarly postmodern kind of short story writing itself for you on the spot.
Yeah, or it's, what do you call it, Ouroboros or whatever, where they can
eating its own tail.
Yeah.
It must have been a very strange feeling to kind of see that starting to take shape in front of you.
Yeah, although you don't really see it taking shape in front of you. You see tiny, tiny bits. But the screenwriter, Gregory Burke, was there every day. He was sitting behind the camera every day with the director. He was so hands-on.
Yeah.
He loves working with actors. He's written plays as well as screenplays. He loves being around actors, loves working with them. And I just thought, this is great. I don't need to be here every day because Greg's here every day.
Yeah. And you yourself have kind of worked on a play that kind of came from the Rebus stable as well. Did that sort of inform your conversations with the screenwriter for the new adaptation?
No, because let me think. The play was written during lockdown.
Right.
And I think we had most of Rebus scripted before that. I honestly can't remember. No, it didn't. I mean, again, it's the Rebus stage play, which has only been seen so far in Hornchurch in Essex, but we're hoping we'll tour next year, was written during lockdown, and it was written for lockdown. Right. I thought, when theatres come out of lockdown, what are they going to look for? They're going to look for a 2-act play because they want an interval because that's when they make their money from the bar. Yeah. 6 actors maximum so that they keep costs down, 1 set unchanging.
Yeah.
So it's basically an inspector calls.
Yeah.
It's what it is. It's a dinner party in Edinburgh, but one of the dinner party guests is Rebus, aged around 65 to 70, so retired.
Yeah.
So it's that period. And they're playing a murder mystery game that the hostess has devised. And then at the end of Act 1, somebody comes from the toilet and said, by the way, there's a body in the toilet. Cut. And then you start Act 2, and there's a real mystery to be solved before the police arrive. So Rebus is trying to solve it before Siobhan Clarke and her colleagues arrive.
Fantastic. So there's another sort of very kind of classical murder mystery trope there, isn't there? Brilliant.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's like a closed room. You've got 6 people. One of them must have done it. 5 if you exclude the detective. 6 characters in search of an author kind of territory as well. Slightly postmodernist, nodding to an inspector calls, nodding to the kind of Cluedo style traditional mystery story, because you've got this fictional mystery they're trying to solve takes place in a country house, and the lord of the manor has been found bludgeoned, etc., etc. Could it be the butler? Could it be the groundskeeper? So you've got all of that going on, but these very modern people trying to solve it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And having previewed it at Hornchurch, me seeing it for the first time, I thought, I could do with adding a little bit there and a little bit there and a little bit there. So I spent a month earlier this year doing that. So it is now, I think it's right now. It's just perfect now, and it's ready for people to see it. So hopefully the producers at the moment are looking at a tour. So hopefully next year it'll be touring the UK.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's really great news. And as you say, I just think those theatre kind of producers, those receiving theatres who need 2-act plays with an interval and a great kind of economic model, perfect. 6
actors, no scene changes, just get in there, yeah. A few props, but props are pretty cheap.
Props are fine.
But I mean, I've written plays before, and I find it really hard, because as a novelist, you get as many words as you need, as many characters as you need, and time is malleable. Whereas in a play, everything's a lot tighter. You know, you've got to have doors, but the doors, you can only have so many doors. You can only have so many scene changes, so many actors. So it messes with your head, and it makes you, it just stretches you as a writer. It makes you think differently about, how can I do this? How can I tell the story I want to tell within these constraints? Novelists have probably the fewest constraints of any writing form. Well, maybe poetry. I guess poetry. Every novelist is jealous of poets, right? Because poets can say in one line what it takes me 100,000 words to say, you know? Yeah. And I'm always very envious of poets who are also novelists. So Muriel Spark, possibly my favorite novelist of all time, was a poet.
Yeah.
And on her grave in Italy, it just says Muriel Spark, poeta. It doesn't say novelist. It just says poeta. She always thought of herself as a poet who wrote novels, not a novelist who wrote poetry.
It kind of struck me that the rise is sort of halfway house between a novel and a play. In that sense, it's kind of very structured because of the time limits. You said earlier that kind of you might have started almost writing novels too early in your life. What are the major changes that you've kind of seen in kind of across that writing span in terms of what the writer's life is, what you have to do to be a writer?
How long have you got?
Yeah.
I don't understand the industry now. There's a lot of the industry I don't understand now. I mean, now you can be a hugely successful writer without going anywhere near a traditional publishing house.
Yeah.
If you're willing to put in the hours to self-promote and to self-edit and to design your covers and everything else and to proofread your books and all that, you can sell your stuff direct online and make a good living from doing it eventually. And you can bypass agents, traditional publishers, paper publishing, the whole thing. You can do a deal with Amazon, and they'll take a much smaller cut of your earnings than a traditional publishing house will. A traditional publisher, you get, 10%? Author usually gets 10% of the cover price. But you can do deals with Amazon and elsewhere online where you're getting much more than that. So that model is, when I started in this game, I got the train down to London. I might have even got the night bus because that was cheaper. I was still a student. When my first book, the first Rebus novel was signed up, I was still a student. I got probably a night bus to London and then walked to Bloomsbury to my publishing house, Bodley Head, and went in naively thinking that Muriel Spark and Graham Greene would be sitting in reception waiting to see their editors, because Bodley Head published Graham Greene and Muriel Spark at that time, amongst others. What did I know? I knew nothing about the traditional publishing model. And my editor took me to his club for lunch. And, it was all like that. And that's gone.
Yeah.
Within 10 years, that was starting to go. And publishing in the UK was becoming less of a gentleman's hobby and a bit more hard-nosed and driven by accountants and bottom lines and American practices. So all of those changes have been huge. The internet arriving has been huge for publishers and authors and everybody else and readers. And I don't understand it. I'm a Luddite. My computer at home runs on coal. I've still got a CD-ROM in my computer. I use the same table that I bought in 1986. I print everything out and edit it on the printed page. I've got no idea how to send WhatsApp messages or anything like this. So, when I started in this game, the first novel I wrote, I went to the university library to photocopy it because that was the cheapest way of photocopying. I think it was 2p a sheet. But you had to feed 2 pences into the machine, into the slot of the printer and just press it. So for a 200-page novel, you were 200 sheets, 202 pences, and then press the button to print each sheet, which I then put in a jiffy bag and took to the post office to physically post to a publisher in London so they could send it back to me 3 months later, saying, not for us. Now, when I finish, and that was great. The great thing about that was you've sweated blood over this book, and now here's all this physical hard work that goes with it. Now I finished the book and I've pressed send.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's like there's no effort at all. And it's like this thing has no weight. This thing has no significance. It's just a lot of numerals that are getting sent around the globe. And I just go, I hark back to those lovely days of queuing at the post office with this big, heavy manuscript thinking, I wrote this. Wasn't so nice when it came back, though.
No, well, at least they sent it back.
They did send it back, yeah. Yeah,
it certainly wouldn't happen these days. Do you think it's something about the ritual that's quite important to finishing that?
I mean, ritual's important to every writer. Even now, if you go online, whenever a writer finishes their book, they always post a photograph, don't they, a screenshot of the end at the bottom of the screen, or how many words.
Usually with the word count at the bottom.
I never do the word count. What's the obsession with word count? I have no idea why people do that. Oh, I wrote 3,000 words today. So what? What if they're terrible words? Would you rather write 500 fantastic words than 3,000 poor words? No, I never look at that. I never look at any of it. It's only when I print it out and start page numbering that I get a sense of how long the book is.
Yeah. So kind of you've got, I think is it right that you're under contract to do one more Rebus?
Yeah, I'm under contract to do one more Rebus, which I'm going to start fairly soon. And it's got to be in by June next year, and it'll be published, I guess, October next year. Mm-hmm. And yes, it will be a Rebus. And my agent is terrified it'll be the last Rebus. But as you know, I mean, the last book that I published, Heart Full of Headstones, had the feeling of being an ending, being a big fat full stop at the end of a series.
Or so I thought until the end.
Yeah, I kind of thought so too, and then I thought, no, there's at least one more thing I need to say. It's a bit like Columbo when he's just about to leave the suspect, and he goes, just one more thing. It's like whenever I think I'm done with Rebus, or I'm done with writing about Edinburgh, or done with writing crime fiction, I go, wait a minute though, what about that? I've not said that yet, or I've not explored that aspect of Rebus's character yet, or I've not done this with them, and that would be an interesting thing to do. It's like this guy has an independent life, which I have no control over. In fact, sometimes I feel that he made me up. I didn't make him up. He made me up. He controls me. And it's extraordinary. And people come to the Oxford Bar and they're so disappointed when he's not there waiting for them, because he seems so real to them. And of course, it's a real pub, so they think they're going to find him there. And all they find is this pale facsimile, this palimpsest, this grey author who's not very interesting, hasn't
been written by his own creation.
Really? I mean, what did you do this year, Ian? Well, I wrote a book. Anything else? No. He gets to have all the adventures. I get to have no adventures at all.
And one of the joys of Rebus, I think, is perhaps one of the reasons why he feels like so independent to readers, is that he's a man who is in constant dialogue with the world around him. And not just dialogue, but a kind of an exasperated argument. Mm-hmm. So you feel like he's very alive in the present. And I do think that kind of having him age kind of properly alongside the readership has worked brilliantly for that, even though it must have set you an enormous amount of challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it did. I wanted to do it because I thought, how can you write about the changing nature of the UK, Scotland, Edinburgh, politics, the economy, culture, society, if your detective doesn't change? Mm-hmm. If your detective is inaspic, never ages. I thought, no, he needs to age. He needs to age. So that early on, I thought, no, he is going to age in real time. But I had no idea, of course, that I was going to be writing about, nearly 40 years on from when I started. Is it nearly 40 years? It is almost nearly 40 years on. I think I started writing the first novel in 84, 85. God, that's depressing. No, I mean, I've known him longer than I've known most of my friends, I've known him I've known him almost as long as I've known my wife. And yet I don't really know him at all. I'm still learning about him, which is why I keep having to write more books to get to the center of what makes him tick.
Well, I'm really very much looking forward to kind of finding out what happens after the ending of the last one, which kind of left me slightly sweaty and kind of
good,
outraged.
Excellent. That's it. And you can blame my agent for some of that without giving away too much. It was one thing at the end was my agent's idea, not my idea. So there you go.
Okay. Correct. Well, I'll shake their hand. Can I ask you, we're going to kind of round up shortly, but can I ask you kind of what you're reading or what have you read recently that has really sort of got your heart kind of quickening?
There's a Scottish writer called Michael Malone, and he's got a novel called The Murmurs, it's coming out right now, I think. Mm-hmm. And he sent me an early copy of it, and it's really good. It's spooky, it's scary. It's a young woman who seems to be able to see when people are going to die. And he takes that in all kinds of interesting directions. There's a kind of serial killer at large. There's a lot of family stuff from her past she's got to uncover. And he does it in under 300 pages or 350 pages. As I get older, I'm a huge fan of shorter books. And I literally just finished reading Jilly Cooper's next one, which I don't think is published until November. I was snowed in once in France with my wife. And the only book in the house I hadn't read was her Jilly Cooper novel, Rivals. So I picked up and read it. Bloody loved it. Yeah. I thought it was just such a great escapist romp. Yeah. And it was a kind of Rutshire was a place I wanted to visit. Hang out with all these reprobates, these posh reprobates, as they were rutting in Rutshire. Anyway, they're all back in this book. Rupert Campbell Black is back, but he's now the good guy, not the bad guy. He gets into the world of football, buys a football team, and it's what happens to the football team. So a lot of fun. I'm so glad because I think she's really got her mojo back. This has touches of the classic Rivals and Riders era Jilly Cooper about it. So there you go. Two very different books for you.
I used to work at Waterstones on Deansgate back in the days when Robert Topping was running it, and they had Dead on Deansgate, and Jilly Cooper was one of... Well, I remember, she was one of the shop's most favourite visiting authors because she was such an unalloyed joy to welcome as a reader and as a writer.
Yep, and every time I mention her in an interview, she sends me a present. So
excellent. Thank you so much for joining.
I still see Robert Topping from time to time. He's just one of the great booksellers.
Amazing. I learned so much in my time working with him. Absolutely. Just incredible. And also, I know I worked with just a brilliant range of people in that shop who've got on to do some fantastic things in the publishing world, still all there in lots of ways.
And I should mention in passing, because of who you are and where you are, that of course I was visiting professor of creative writing at Norwich, UEA for a while. And in my class, I had various authors, including Harriet Tice.
Yes.
So she owes everything to me.
Excellent.
Harriet, if you're watching, no, I mean, she'd already finished her first novel, I think, by the time I was trying to teach her. I wasn't really teaching.
That was Blood Orange, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was an extraordinary thing. A lot of the authors on that course already had agents.
Yeah,
they had books that were under option or whatever. And I thought, wow, the world has changed so much. When I started in this game, there was literally one creative writing course in the whole of the UK, and it was UEA.
Yeah.
And just last week, I had dinner with Ian McEwan, who, of course, was the first ever student at UEA, and who talks about it fondly. But he didn't get an awful lot of teaching.
I don't think it was even a proper course at that point. It was just him kind of talking to a couple of venerable older writers, Malcolm Bradbury et al.
Yeah. Malcolm Bradbury just in the pub saying, keep going.
Yeah. Well, we've got Noirich, the crime writing festival that we run, kind of the lecture this evening. So I'll pass on my very best wishes from you to those guys. And thank you so much for joining us today, Ian. It's been a joy to read The Rise, which is out in November as part of the Amazon short stories collection, and can't recommend it enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Ian Rankin and to Chris for their time, and thank you to you for listening. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation over on our website by going to the Support Us page. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a rating and a review, because this helps other writers to find us. Thanks again. Keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.